This is a new Nigeria with Wale Oluwade. This is your current affairs program where we critically examine the strategic issues bedeviling Nigeria's developmental aspirations and boldly offer practical suggestions on building the Nigeria of our collective desires. Today's episode promises to be engaging and exciting. My guest is already here to assist me in doing justice and also give depth and clarity to the topic of our discourse. As always, it's going to be evidence-driven, honest, bold, and a no-holds-barred conversation. So get ready as we begin in earnest. And now, let's get on with it. Our topic today is the presidential address, issues and implications. On July 31st, President Bola Tinubu delivered his second address to the nation. It was more or less an economic policy statement wherein he enumerated a number of interventionist initiatives aimed at ameliorating the pains and sufferings of the tens of millions of Nigerians reeling from the extremely unbearable socio-economic conditions occasioned by years of inept and unpatriotic governance, but particularly exacerbated by the sudden death approach in the removal of the fuel subsidy by this president. Now, how far did the president's speech go to providing hope and respite to the people and economy at large? Are these initiatives realistic and attainable? Also, is this sufficient to assuage the understandable distemper of organized labor who are threatened to embark on a nationwide protest from August 2nd? These are some of the issues we're examining today. We'll take this short break, and when we return, we'll get right into our conversation. Please stay with us. Welcome back. My guest today is Professor Uche Uwaleke. Prof, good morning.
Thanks so much.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Yes.
Now, Professor Uche Uwaleke is a foremost professor of capital markets management in Nigeria, but importantly, is the new director capital market studies at the Nasarawa State University. He was also a former commissioner for finance in Imo State. Prof, once again, you're welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Wale.
You know, whenever it has to do with economy, you know, you are my, default mode, you know.
Thank you.
So, I'm sure you listened to the president's second speech on
Sure.
July 31st. I think that was Monday.
Sure.
What stood out to you from that speech?
Well, I thought it came at the right time. It was more like a balm. You know, it was quite suiting. You know, before then the place was atmosphere, if you like, was tensed. Labour was threatening to go on strike. So he came and made that broadcast and you know, kind of diffused the tension. And I think that broadcast was well communicated in terms of the language that was used. He said he avoided technical terms. So he actually communicated to Nigerians. Of course, it started by providing justifications for the reforms, particularly the sudden, I want to use your word, sudden debt approach, the removal of fuel subsidy, and then the unification of exchange rates. Of course, he made the point that the subsidy was actually being abused, and then the issue of exchange rate, he also said it became, you know, to also quote him, a highway of corruption. So there was need for them to go. But exactly. Of course, in all of this, you know, the questions have always been, you know, the measures that are being churned out now, why were they not put in place before removing subsidy, before implementing the reforms? But again, in that speech, he talked about the lag. He recognized the lag, you know, and then said, promised that government would move fast, you know, to be able to close up. Of course, you saw the various interventions, particularly in the areas that the subsidy removal, you know, impacted on. Yes, the areas that are hurting the most. The food aspect, he said government had plans to distribute 200,000 metric tons of grains and 225 metric tons of fertilizer, you know, to farmers. The aspect of transport, okay, he also mentioned the plan to spend 100 billion naira to procure 3,000 20-seater buses that will be shared, you know, across the states to, you know, transport owners. But more importantly, the interventions in the area of industry, manufacturing, starting with the nano businesses, one-man businesses, where he mentioned, giving 50,000 naira to 1,300 nano one-man businesses in each of the 774 local governments. And that's now will go up like 50 billion. And then the issue of course, 75 billion to 75 enterprises, and so on and so forth.
The major thing you said, which I concur totally, is that that speech came at the right time.
Oh, yes.
It was a soothing balm.
Yeah, yes.
It diffused the tension, the brewing tension, assuaged, frayed nerves.
Absolutely.
I agree with you entirely.
Yes.
And for me, that's a major departure from the immediate past president.
Oh, yes.
Who was never available, no matter what was going on.
Oh, yes.
He never spoke to anybody. He couldn't be bothered.
Oh, yes.
All you saw were his aides who would go out, and rather than make the situation, better,
yes,
they worsen it by their intemperate use of language and all of that.
Exactly. So I agree with you. This one, to me, shows, demonstrates that, to a large extent, he listens. Look at when the issue of distributing 8,000 naira.
He backed up.
He
backtracked on it.
Exactly.
Now, Prof, let's get into the meat of this.
Yes.
You mentioned some of this, and those are the issues I actually want us to examine in details. Number one, when you talked about releasing grains, 220 metric tons of grains from strategic reserves, the issue is not whether you're releasing grains or providing fertilizer. The issue is that the farmers, even if you give them the grains, where are the farms? What is the situation of our farmers having access to their farms currently? So if you do not deal with the issue of insecurity that has made farmers' access to farms, a dangerous, if not a death wish, that is one. But so let me give you two so that you take the two, and then we'll take others. The second one, the president said they were going to purchase, you mentioned it, 1,000 buses.
3,000.
3,000 buses, sorry.
Yes.
Running on CNG,
yes,
at a cost of 100 billion naira. Yes. Of course, the issue is not whether it is desirable, it is desirable.
Oh,
but
yes.
my point, and last time you and I were here talking about this, the first point is, are we buying this locally? I didn't see that. That was a gray area.
Yes.
Because if you are going to create jobs with high unemployment in Nigeria,
yes,
why do you want to import this,
yes,
and create, give revenue to this other country, create jobs there, rather than maybe patronize Innocin or any of these other local manufacturing companies here? But importantly, this was what should have happened.
Oh, yes.
Before, in my own thinking, before that policy pronouncement about fuel subsidy removal. So take this to Prof.
Okay, yes, I agree with you. Maybe I should start from the last one. Yes, these measures ought to have happened before now. But again, the previous administration had the opportunity, had the time, to do
8
that.
years.
Yes, 8 years. But unfortunately, that wasn't done. Now that we have a new administration, of course, I had expected that the announcement of the fuel subsidy removal, shouldn't have been done a month earlier. Okay, but now that it has happened, I think part of why the president is choosing that route. Remember, he made a comment in that address. He talked about alternatives. He said, as far as he was concerned, there were no alternatives because if there were, he would have taken the route. Okay, I think my interpretation of that is that there was no provision for fuel subsidy, beyond June of this year. Okay, so he had to, do something about it.
You and I know that is just, a kind of political speak. If he wanted, he could have sent an appropriation, a supplementary appropriation bill to the National Assembly.
Yes, but of course, you also know the implication. The implication would mean you balloon the deficit. The implication would mean the government also going to borrow, because come to think of it, the subsidies were actually being funded, from borrowings. In
fact, printing, ways and means.
Oh yes.
But if you've weighed that vis-a-vis the implications of this knee-jerk, sudden death approach to subsidy, Prof, as we speak, Nigeria is going to do, tailspin into a recession as because businesses are hemorrhaging. Purchasing power has been badly depleted. By the time Q3, even Q3, returns come out from the NBS, I'll be surprised if Nigeria. But let me allow you continue on your.
Well, again, I agree with you. If you look at my views on the reforms, I had always advocated, a phased approach.
Yes, which I agree with entirely.
Proper sequencing of the reforms. Even in his policy advisory, I'm talking about the president's policy advice. You will see there he didn't talk about the sudden, death. But again, it has happened, and we're trying to see how that can be managed, particularly to minimize the adverse impact it's having on the economy. Just as you rightly mentioned, the economy is actually being hot.
Absolutely.
As we speak, a lot of people don't go to work any longer. Even in some states, they tell them
2-3 days.
Exactly. So
days.
It's affecting productivity, no doubt. Okay. Now, on the issue of this, vehicles, yes, of course, the best thing would have been to procure them locally. All right. And it's not just the one for mass transport.
Absolutely.
Even the ones to be used by National Assembly.
70 billion.
Yes.
They want to buy bulletproof vehicles. In the first place, do they actually even need bulletproof? Who wants to kill you?
I'm even saying that kind of spend can wait. There are expenditures that we can differ, given the peculiar situation we'll find ourselves. So you differ these things and allow time and possibly give the local manufacturers opportunity to produce them.
Absolutely.
Okay, but in the case of this one in particular, all right, it also depends on whether we have the local capacity.
Expertise.
Yes, because the president talked about making this available between now and March.
Exactly.
We have a time frame. Okay, so do we have the local capacity to produce that gas powered? Okay, between now and March. If we, of course, if there is evidence that we do, there is no reason why they shouldn't do it here. But if there is evidence that there's no capacity to do that, of course, I'm sure that's why they are resorting to the import. On the issue of the agric, he talked about activating 500,000 hectares of land. All right. Okay. Now we are not going to say until you fix insecurity before you begin to do this, because the truth of the matter is that there are also some parts of the country that are not hard hit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you begin to I expect him, okay, to implement these things side by side while he's dealing with insecurity. We have new service chiefs, for example. Okay, while they're dealing with insecurity, these other actions should also go, pari passu.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful. The other one, Prof, that is of concern to me, you also mentioned it in your opening remarks. 75 manufacturing businesses will receive a loan of 1 billion at 9% interest rate and also 1 year working capital, repayable in 60 months or 5 years. Is this feasible? Considering the daily erosion in the value of the naira, what will the 1 billion, how far can it impact the activities of a manufacturing entity? Prof?
Yes. In the first instance, what I have to say here is that if you notice, the central bank over the years, has done a lot of interventions, a raft of interventions. Okay, so I think it is time that we've even had a report, an evaluation of the performance of those interventions.
Absolutely, Uncle Bora's program, this one, that, so many of them.
No, especially these large ones to these large
farmers.
Yes, who got what? All right, because if you don't do that, and you also end up giving the same set of people another 1 billion, there's also the likelihood that it will be
produce the same results.
The same results. So except you start by
a proper audit.
A proper audit. Thank you.
Of what has gone on before.
Of what has gone on with respect to the interventions.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So by the time you do that, you can now pinpoint what the problems are. And then if a particular company, because these large firms are still going to be the same people that will be applying.
Absolutely.
If a particular one has a default,
gotten something before and defaulted,
you don't have to admit that kind of firm. So these are the things that should be in place before these disbursements are made. 1 billion is a lot of money if it can be well utilized. The issue of 50 billion to one-man businesses, the challenge there is the data. Okay, how do you identify the 1,300 in each local government? How do we make sure that the disbursements don't get politicized? Okay, but there is one thing that I didn't see in that speech. I didn't hear the president, which is what will the executive arm, let me just say, what will those in authority, not only the executive arm, the National Assembly, the judiciary, what will they be also doing to share in the pains of Nigerians?
As sacrifice. Every day the president calls for Nigerians to make sacrifices. What
patient.
Sacrifices? Exactly. And you should lead by examples anyway.
Yes, you should. What is the
sacrifice
that they, on their part,
are willing
The president could have said, on our own part, we intend to take salary cuts. We don't intend to have a salary from now, between now and March. You know, that kind of
We
thing.
need to cut down on these bogus perks and allowances and DTAs, all this traveling and all of that. Prof.
Cost of governance is very key.
Oh, absolutely.
And look at what is even happening now. 47 ministers. Do we need 47 ministers?
And so many other aides. They're talking about almost 100. Prof, let's take a short break. We'll come back and address more issues. We'll take this short break, and when we return, we'll continue with our conversation. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Prof, you know, I love your last comment on
we should all be part of
cutting drastic reduction in the cost of governance and eliminating waste in the entire government bureaucracy. I think we cannot overstate you know, how critical that is. Particularly, you know, the aspect of leading by example by saying on our part, the presidential air fleet, we have 10 aircraft, 8 aircraft, we're shutting it down to maybe 2.
Whatever savings we have from there, we'll put in this, we'll also plow in this.
And then, in fact, even these 2 aircraft, if we're not using them, myself and the vice president or senate president, whoever entrepreneur that wants to go anywhere, come and play and use it. So that we also generate money from that. But, Prof, let's go straight because of time. The 500 billion thereabouts total expenditure in these several interventions, that's what it comes to, about 500 billion. It just represents about 0.5% of the entire GDP of Nigeria, which is about 220 trillion naira, about 500 billion, but if you convert it to naira, 220 trillion. So it just represents about 0.5%. In your view, is this strategic enough to catalyze, you know, the much desired impact of this economy? Because the analogy is like the economy is in ICU. Is in a life support. If someone is having cardiac arrest, you know, has had cardiac arrest, and you want to jumpstart the heart, you apply, you know, electric shock to jumpstart the heart. Is this figure, 500 billion, in an overall economy of 220 trillion, is this sufficient in your view?
I think it's a drop in
an ocean.
What is 500 billion, you know, to address the issue of you know, poverty, to stimulate production. So I think it's very infinitesimal. Yes, it's very small. And if you also look at the leakages, weight, and so on, okay, by the time you plug and aggregate them, you get much more than what people are even frittering away. You get much more than 500. And of course, you also realize that he said that the government, you know, was able to save 1 trillion.
1 trillion so far.
Okay, of course, savings in the sense that the government is not going to borrow to do that. All right. So I expect that such
monies would be made available for this intervention.
And a lot more.
Absolutely.
And of course, the infrastructure support fund is also a good one, of course. Especially if they will also be well applied, particularly at the level of states. State governors also have a lot of role to play. So when we're saying the executive arm should make sacrifice, not only at the federal level,
the entire architecture, 3 tiers of government.
Exactly.
Prof, as we round up, it would be remiss of me not to, you know, pick your brains on the ministerial screening that is ongoing. Yesterday, they concluded on 27 or 28, the first 28 batch.
Another 19.
Another 19 came in yesterday. Now, have you been impressed so far by what you have seen on the process, on the methodology adopted? You know, it's becoming boring because we say the same things over and over. Our leaders keep doing the same thing. What's your view so far?
My view about it is that when it comes to ministerial screening, okay, there should be no exemption. Okay,
take a bow.
Yes, take a bow. The questions should be asked. And again, I also thought that the president would have assigned portfolios, because that will also enable the lawmakers to know the correct kind of questions to ask. Now, the idea that assigning portfolios before that time, because that's the argument somebody was making, that it will constrain the president. The president, you know, is at liberty to change his mind at any time. No, for me, that doesn't hold water. You assign portfolios, okay? So if somebody is appearing before the National Assembly, he will be asked questions based on the portfolio that they have.
This current process that you saw, does it help to improve our governance capacity in any way? This is what you just witnessed, especially with a return of maybe 10 or so governors, some of these other personal aides of the president who has been with him for
Yes.
donkey years.
Oh, yes.
Does this engender hope in you as a technocrat, as a professional?
Well, I see hope from the angle of the people that have been with him for long.
Yes.
Maybe the Wale Dus, the
Yes.
Dela Lakes.
Yes.
Okay, I see some, hope.
The chief of staff, Gajabia Miller.
Yes, but on the part of his governors, you look at, get a list of ministerial nominees. His Excellency, His Excellency, His Excellency. I don't think that's
inspires hope.
Oh yes, because even if you want to compensate them,
Yes.
we hear he's compensating. Even if you want to compensate, you get them to nominate.
Absolutely.
Give them your criteria.
Absolutely.
These are the criteria for people I want to appoint them. Give them that privilege to nominate. It must not be themselves. Okay? Because I see a situation in which the president may have difficulty controlling these
Managing
people, managing them. They are also chief executives before now, and they may be doing more politics.
Absolutely.
More politics
No,
than even
not that they may. That's what they'll be doing.
Yes, than the work they have been asked to
Absolutely.
do. So I think I'm pretty sure that maybe his next round, the next time next 2 years.
I think what we can hope for
Yes.
in this particular president from antecedents is that most of these ministers is not going to be like in the previous administration where President Buhari appointed ministers in 2015 and they stayed there
No,
till 2023.
no, I said something.
So the beautiful thing about this,
I said the next round, maybe the next 2 years. He should now have an
I don't even
opportunity.
think President Tinubu, from
Yes.
his antecedents,
Yes.
is a man I know pretty well.
Yes.
He's not the kind of man who will give you a job and go to bed.
Yes.
In 1 year, take my word, Prof.
Yes.
You and I will be here to talk about it.
Yes.
Some of these ministers will be gone in a year.
Yes.
So,
And
but Prof,
I won't be surprised.
I won't be surprised,
Yes,
definitely.
but the number is unwieldy.
It's unwieldy. It's
40,
totally
40,
unreasonable.
47,
We need to cut down cost of governance.
yes.
Prof, we can go on, but this is an ongoing process. When the ministers are inaugurated, we'll come back and
Okay.
analyze even the overall governance objectives of this administration.
Thank you
so much for coming, Prof.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate
My
it. Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Now, that's the end of the interview segment. We'll take this short break, and when I return, I'll give my closing statements. Please stay with us. Welcome back. I am a Nigerian and a patriotic one at that. So in all my public interventions, either here or on other major television networks, I have demonstrated that the interest of Nigeria is extremely paramount to my heart. I am not a politician. I merely interact with them for the sake of generating ideas towards better governance. On this platform, therefore, I am totally non-partisan. Only the interest of Nigeria matters. So, without prejudice to whatever the outcome of the ongoing election litigation is, I desperately wish President Bola Tinubu well. It is in my personal interest and in all of our collective good that he succeeds. Some of us have no other country but this, and the call of patriotic duty has become even more urgent. Nobody will build Nigeria for us except ourselves. But if we are to succeed, we must be patriots and tell ourselves the bitter truth. However hard this truth may sound to the ears, sadly, elected and appointed officials in this country disdain truth tellers, but prefer sycophants who merely deceive them for their inordinate benefits. My objectives on this platform has been and will always remain to proffer practical, sensible, and easily implementable ideas on the remaking of Nigeria into the nation our liberation fathers envisioned and for which some of them paid the supreme sacrifice. I will not be exaggerating if I remind us that Nigeria is in a terribly bad place socially, economically, and politically. The numerous challenges confronting this country, however, are sadly man-made. Nigeria has suffered from decades of misgovernance that is, in the main, criminal. And were we a society given to meting out adequate sanctions to the perpetrators of high crimes, some bordering on willful sabotage, let me state clearly, therefore, rebuilding Nigeria from its current ruins will be a hard, grueling, arduous, and painful exercise, and it will take considerable time before the results are even visible, let alone appreciated. Yet, I fear that this current government of President Bola Tinubu, like the previous one before, has begun exactly how it ought not to. The president's address was, in my humble opinion, a pitiful attempt at reacting to the myriad of serious issues confronting us. I didn't see depth, rigor, or boldness in the interventionist initiatives. More critically, it is a repeat of the exact template of the 8 wasted years of the President Buhari administration, which was largely driven by ad hoc, knee-jerk, reactive plans and policies, often incoherent and driven by mere wishful thinking than any sound economic, ideological, or philosophical understanding. What is needed at this time is a bold, audacious, and far-reaching national economic and development master plan anchored on poverty eradication and attaining economic self-sufficiency. Let me state quite simply, any government which doesn't appreciate the reality of the multidimensional poverty of well over 133 million Nigerians as an existential threat to the country and the entire West African sub-region is merely embarking on a frolic. To this end, I shall be embarking on a 3-part presentation from next episode on a brief strategic framework and implementation plan on this for the attention of those in authority. Hopefully, someone high up in the power matrix finds it useful in the interest of Nigeria. Please keep a date with me. Remember, change requires action, and positive change requires positive action. I believe in a new Nigeria, and it is possible. And those are my closing thoughts. Now, that's the end of the program today. Remember to follow me on my different social media handles. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can watch this particular video and the others there at your convenience. Drop your comments also. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.